outgrowth of nature. So it's a unified field. It's a unity or oneness. And then, if we understand this, that's why I want to go back into the Memphite theology, because it's the underlying foundation for all what we're doing. Because remember, the original question that was asked was what? The original question, remember I said there was this question I kept asking. Everyone should memorize. If you have Stolen Legacy, look up in Stolen Legacy the whole principle of magic. It is not what you may think it is based upon Las Vegas and all that kind of stuff. Yes, ma'am. It's magic. The key to the interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy. Stolen Legacy, he states that the key to the interpretation of ancient religion and philosophy. So you're talking about the key to the understanding of the thinking or the mindset of those that create the foundation for civilization is based upon magic. Now, how is magic defined?
Qualities, attributes, or entities design that are distributed throughout their various parts. Contact with such entities releases those qualities.
This is very essential that everyone really understands that you need to memorize this so that you can contemplate it. If you don't memorize it, how can you contemplate it? If you can't contemplate something, you don't gain deep and profound understanding of what it really means. It's like swallowing your food and not eating your food. Contemplation is like eating your food slowly, so you get all the essence and the flavor out the food, and you can digest it well. Where if you swallow your food down, you're going to get gas. So the same thing in terms of ideas and knowledge. If you just try to swallow it, you're going to have mental gas, which would be interesting in terms of the outcome of that. And let's see. Well, I'll go over these. I'm also going to, and again, you don't have to purchase all these, but you will be getting information from all these books. Probably another key book will be The Sacred Science of Numbers by Corrine Helene. And I have a reference sheet. I do have a reference sheet that I will pass out. I'll show you because I list all these. Okay, Sacred Science by Helene Corrine. And probably another one is Curtis, Key to the Universe, or a spiritual interpretation of numbers and symbols. We're going to go into or make reference to the Metu-Neter, Volume 1, the Great Oracle of Tahuti, and the Egyptian System of Spiritual Cultivation. Metu-Neter. We're going to or I will be, again, this is reference material, The Sacred Tarot by C.C. Zane from the Brotherhood of Light. The Theology of Arithmetic was translated by Robin Waterfield. Egyptian Miracle, or The Introduction to the Wisdom of the Temple by Swala de Lubick. We referred to this before. There are a few more that I haven't included, which I'll update it for next week. Again, you don't have to get all these. If you get anything, at least get Serpent in the Sky. And probably after that, I would say, if you can find Sacred Science, pick it up, because it's fundamental. And of course, any of the other ones. If you don't have Metu-Neter, All of these are great pieces, though. So, yes, it is. Volume 1 is the main one, right?
There's also a set of possibilities.
Right, but I'm not so much going to be dealing with that as just really kind of dealing with some of the correlations. Basically, what we're going to be looking at is going through each of the numbers and then looking at the corresponding philosophical, spiritual symbolism that's related to each of those numbers, and how each of those numbers plays a role in creation, in terms of 0 being like the noon, or the great potentiality, or the great sea of the void, out of which all things evolve out of. And then the number 1 being the whole logos concept, the demiurge upon which the one that then generated creation. Then the 2 dealing with duality. And the duality is the polarity between the male and the female, the positive and the negative, electrons and protons, all these things that we've already talked about. But now we're going to tie it together through other symbolism and ideas that it's related to. And then the 3 dealing with the harmony and the triangle and reconciliation. 4 then dealing with the cube and the physical manifestation of materiality. 5 then relating to the 5th element of consciousness and the ethers and consciousness. 6 many times relating to the 2 3s and the whole thing about love and sexuality. 7 dealing with perfection on the physical plane, the 7-fold constitution of nature. 8 dealing with transformation, regeneration, and the mysteries. 9 dealing with the number of completion on the spiritual plane. 10 really dealing with is 1, because 10 really is 1 and 0. Because really you start off with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which gives you 10. And so really 9 is completion, because a 0 is a placeholder, and it's also an all. And so we're going to get into all those kind of things. And so all these other books will just be references, because I'm constantly trying to expose you to the various systems from the various schools, because the object is for us to become universal in our understanding, so we can transcend or go beyond the superficial divisions that create destruction. Because remember, division is relating to diabolos, or diabolo, or diabolical, or devil. So the whole concept of devil is being divisive or separative, because life is based upon harmony or unity, because all things operate within the circle. And remember, we went back and we were talking about geometry and how all geometrical forms or shapes are defined by its relationship relative to the circle. I got it as a handout that I gave you on geometry, and it has the definitions of regular polygons. You need to go back into your material and get that handout and read what it says. Everything that I give you has very significant reference points in that material. If you don't study the material, you are going to be incomplete in terms of how I'm communicating, because everything I'm referring to, you have, and have many times over in different forms. That's why I say that to gain the world, you have to renounce the world. And what I mean by that is, you can't be so involved in worldly things, because if you spend all your time involved in worldly things, you will be of the world. But the world is a reflection of the spiritual world, which is the true foundation of the outer. So for you to gain the real world, you have to turn your back on the outer world, which means how you spend your time and where you focus your mind. And so then, if it means you don't look at no TV, then that may be what it takes. If it means that you have to carry the stuff around with you, and when you're in traffic and the traffic slows up, or you're in the line at the grocery store and you're sitting there for 10 or 15 minutes, pull your material out. Consistency is the point. Not you got to spend 3-4 hours a day, although that's beautiful if you can, and sometimes you'll get to spend 3 and 4 hours a day. There'll be other times you may not be able to spend but 10 minutes. But in the long run, it will all balance out if you are consistent. If you are consistent.
You were mentioning diabolical and visions. Greek jumped into my mind. Now, what happened is these Greeks, their origin came from Egypt, right?
The what came?
If I see the word division or diabolical or devil,
right,
people say, oh, Greek origin. But really, it's not Greek origin, it's an Egyptian origin.
In terms of diabolical?
Yeah.
It's a concept. See, the whole it's of no. Those concepts and those functions exist separate from humans. Humans only identified them and put them into a language. The language they put them into was related to a particular time and space. But the concepts are beyond. The humans did not create these things or invent these things. They uncovered them because they already exist. The universe operates off these principles.
What I was saying, when you start saying these divisions,
right,
I thought about Greek,
right.
And then I'm asking you that really, when you look at the book, you say that it's Greek origin. Really, that's not a Greek origin, it's really an Egyptian origin. Right?
What is of a Egyptian origin?
The word itself.
The word itself? Well, probably diabolical. That diabolical itself is of Greek origin. That term, but the term is identifying an idea that is not of Greek origin. Because if you study Stolen Legacy, you know that the Greeks, in terms of all of their philosophical ideas, came from them educated in Kemet or in Egypt. So then when you read Greek philosophy or so-called Greek philosophy, because, what's the title of the book? Stolen Legacy. The Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the people of North Africa, commonly called the Egyptians. There it is right there, on the cover. You ain't even got to open the book up. Something else I'm really trying to emphasize is we can get caught up into the so-called complexity of things that we miss the simple facts that are right there in front of us. They're like right here on the cover of the book. You ain't even got to open the book up. Right there. But see, that goes back to contemplation and reflection. People pick it up, they got it. But, have you ever sat down and looked at the book? Look at the imagery they got on the book? Look at the words? And really, reflect on it. So, I was talking about diabolical and division as opposed to symbols and symbolical, which means unified or inclusive. And the whole thing we're getting into is the symbolic interpretation and meaning of number and how various other symbols and concepts in philosophical and religious systems reflect these numerical ordering. And so, two books, I don't need to put it. Did I put these on there? Symbol and Symbolic? Or I didn't put this one. Symbol and Symbolic is Egypt, Science, and the Evolution of Consciousness. And it talks about the role and what a symbol is and how symbols were utilized in the ancient Kemetic thinking. We need to really understand this because the way our own intuitive mind functions, it functions symbolically, which means we really need to become very conversant, very familiar with the functions of symbols as opposed to signs. It's like, a stop sign. Well, that's just telling you to stop right here. But now you could look at the symbol of that, octagon, although the way they're using it is not appropriate. But the point I'm saying is the difference between a sign and a symbol. And so there's another book called, I had to add this to it, Esotericism and Symbol. Because if you don't really understand how symbols function and operate, have multiple meanings on different levels, you then get into a state of confusion, because in one context the symbol means this, in another context that same symbol means something else. Well, in divisive thinking, those are different, which then you can't reconcile. It creates confusion in your mind. But if you can understand symbolism, how symbolism functions, you can see the unity between apparent oppositions or apparently different things. Which, if you understand, or hopefully getting kind of the flow of what I'm saying, we go back to the whole issue of diabolical and devil and division and separation and symbol and unity and inclusiveness. We can then see how the present day world is in such a chaotic state. Because basically the present world functions off of division, separation, exclusion. Which, if we then understand the basic structure of nature in the universe, we then can honestly and truthfully predict the outcome of the culture and civilization that operates off that foundation. And then the next following up is that, what role do those of us with an understanding, so-called understanding, never know to the end, you know, I'm just saying that. What role do we then play in terms of participating in it or helping to transform it?
Sounds like Chinese. I think you talk to say exactly what you say.
What do you say?
How you say this nature of the universe and universe.
Oh, the yin and the yang, the Tao. Talking about the Tao. Right. Right. Well, you know, the early Chinese were black.
Yeah.
Shang Dynasty was a black dynasty. Right. So who migrated from the east, who brought the light.
Just understanding our driving around where we play in.
Either supporting the destruction and division or transforming the destruction and division into more cohesive, inclusive. And really it's a battle of the mind. The battleground is consciousness. It's the mind. That's the age of Aquarius is the air. Air is the mind, the intellect, thinking. So that's where the revolution got to go on. So it's got to go on in us first if we're going to help to create that same or similar changes in others. So I included Handbook of Humanistic Astrology because in here they have a section on the significance of numbers. Chapter 7 talks about the significance of numbers and Pythagorean mathematics. I have handed this page out in the course of the classes also, and we will get further copies of that. And also, this connects us back into astronomy, astrology, because it's all interconnected. It also then will help you understand cycles, because cycles operate in phases. And phases then is an ordered process that relates to number. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, phase 6, phase 7. So if you can start understanding the significance of number, you then also can understand the significance of particular phases, because there's going to be equivalent activity relative to the quality that number represents. Then you also will be able to understand the significance of number in your life, in terms of what is your birth number? What number of years are you now? And if you look at your life, if you would do your own review of your life, you will see reoccurring patterns that happen every so many years, be it 4 years, 7 years, 9 years, or whatever, usually between 1 and 9. Each of us have a certain pattern that major crises or turning points reoccur in our lives during certain phases. So that means you need to look back and understand yourself. And what are the major turning points in your own life? And then, have you thought about this? Are you aware what it is? And then what is the meaning of the crises that you confront? And not so much the external activities of the crises, be it a car accident, a divorce, or going to school, graduating from school, loss of a parent, whatever those major illness, hospitalization. It can be, winning a major award or making some major change in your life. What is the meaning of it is the critical issue, not the external activities. Because you can go through a number of crises that externally appear different, but in reality they're all the same. Until you reconcile the conflict or the lack of understanding that crisis represents, you will continue to repeat it until you have come to completing it or fulfilling it, or come to understand what it really means. Because just by the fact of you not understanding and gaining the lesson, then you call for it to come back again. Your misunderstanding or lack of understanding of the lesson calls to you a future situation for you to gain understanding of that which you don't understand.
You say that's karma?
Yes, that's karma. That's karma. Karma is action. Your action generates actions.
So what you're saying is to see the phases or cycles in your life, you can look at the crisis or whatever in your life.
And then try to gain an understanding of what does it mean. What is the meaning of that? Not just what happened. See, it's like not just what happened, why? Then we talk about the difference between the Western or linear perspective and the Eastern or Oriental perspective. The linear Western perspective just talks about what? It's 991 million miles away, got so many BTUs of heat, it's in such and such a position. Okay. But what does that mean? I'm going to say the esoteric is what is the meaning of the phenomena. What does it mean? So the whole thing about us is, what does our life mean? What does your life mean? Why are you here? What's your purpose?
And you said in the Western concept that's linear, is actually what we call cause and effect.
No, I would say it's a materialistic perspective. Because cause and effect is true. We're here because of a cause.
You said
linear. Linear is like one-dimensional.
Oh, okay.
Right. Not looking at the whole. So they say, okay, there are 9 planets. And they have such and such a distance and such a speed and such a size, such as the orbital pattern. Okay, yeah, and they don't even relate to that. That it has any meaning to it, except that it's in the universe operating. But they don't see that there is a interconnectivity and a purpose behind all of creation is operating under a purpose. There's a purpose to all this. And so then if you don't see the universe with a true purpose, then how do you see yourself with a higher purpose? Then you can make up your own purpose. So then you become a victim of your own imagination, as opposed to being guided by a higher order which is the problem now. People just produce whatever they want to do, they're all free, this and this and that, because they don't feel connected to something greater. And then if we understand to the circle, is everything is within the circle, because the circumference is infinite. So then, if the circumference is infinite, that means that we're all within the circle. Go back to, what was the movie, Simba, Lion King, the circle of life. We're all within the circle of life. That means that we're all within the circle of life. We're all interconnected. That also means if you destroy or hurt anything within that, you're hurting the whole. But if you don't see that, then you can think that this thing is separate from me. I can destroy it and nothing's going to happen to me because we're not connected. Or that I can do something to somebody else and it's over there. It's not here. Sure, because you don't feel connected. Diabolical. This is the guiding philosophical system. We just go put some people in jail and just put them over there, locked behind a wall, and then we're safe. Like we're not connected, like they're not an extension of us. You're putting yourself in prison. So then you will never solve the problem because you're not looking at the true problem. So then if you cannot look at the true problem becomes worse. Now the problem becomes worse, but in your analysis you see it as separate, so your solution becomes worse. But then what does that do? That makes the problem worse. Right. Right. So there's a logical conclusion to the diabolical logic. But then if they try to encouch or color the logic based upon some high principles, they're trying to hide, like this is where they're coming from, and no one critically analyzes their behavior relative to the logic they say they're following, you could truly show the contradiction. So our critical thinking skills, but so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to develop critical thinking skills based upon a higher logic, a universal logic, because a universal logic will be universally true, no matter where you go. And if we operate from that, if aliens come from outer space, we still can cooperate and communicate. Won't even be this thing about why you're all afraid about somebody. Diabolical thinking. Right.
Going back to a higher purpose, it's hard to see what your purpose is. It seems to me because sometimes the energy that you're putting out and you're affecting people, they never come back and tell you, that they have gotten that energy. I have noticed that maybe 4 or 5 years later, somebody will come back and say, I've been trying to, emulate or watch what you've been doing, and try this or that. It seems like you can never know that you're having an effect or that your higher purpose is working or that you have one working because you don't get the feedback. People generally will not tell you that you have affected them in such a way or that they are inspired or touched by the things that you do.
Mm-hmm.
So you can fall off the purpose just by not knowing.
Well, I guess the issue, I can definitely understand what you're saying. I was just talking about that this past weekend. But, not even this past weekend, a couple of days ago. But the point is first of all, how do you ritualize your life in such a way that you consistently reconnect with that source of motivation? You have to incorporate, we say ritualize your life where, whatever form that thing may be. Is it meditation? Is it, to the ancestors? Is it a certain philosophy or certain religion or certain worldview or your political understanding? Whatever that thing may be, you have to take time out to incorporate and reconfirm and reconnect with that on a regular basis. That's why ceremonies and rituals and celebrations really brought people together to reinforce those functions, so that when you're out there on your own, you have some feeling, you have some energy. That's why that's really what the real purpose is of the various spiritual and religious celebrations. But because most of our religious celebrations have become very profane and just kind of connected to the literal interpretation, the symbol, and the outer stuff, it doesn't really fortify us for the work we have to do during this time. That's why it's important for these kind of sessions and more sessions of like this and other things, so that you can get reinforced. But the key thing is what is your original motivation, and is it based in truth?
Well, because I don't know what affects me or how, it's not because of them. It's probably my motivation is to myself most of the time. And so that's why I can't worry about critics or detractors or whatever.
Right.
Because I know that if I don't try to keep on moving on, they're not going to take care of them.
Right.
Right. So, and the other thing is too, I get most of my spirit from spiritual people. Again, if that's a ritual. Is that a ritual?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just interaction, yeah.
People,
Right.
Give the energy. And, I don't know, maybe I'm not telling them what kind of energy you take with me.
Hey, check that out. The other part of that is we become so socialized in the negative that we don't understand the significance and power of just saying, that was positive, or appreciate that, or those kind of things. We've really been negatively socialized, and that's why we have to really consciously re-socialize ourselves under a whole new orientation. And although all of us, in terms of our people, we've been socialized in such a way that many times we take a lot of things for granted. We don't appreciate, a lot of things. I think we're so caught. To me, it goes back to the whole thing about reflecting and contemplating on the significance of your experiences. I mean, how many of us really sit around and really reflect on the significance of experiences you went through? And then understand to give words of appreciation and encouragement. Yeah, I mean, right. What is the deep? Yeah, right. That's what this whole class is about. Going deep.
It's hard to go deep, sometimes if you're not conscious,
Oh yeah, it's very hard to go deep if you're not conscious. Well, now the thing is, you're not aware, you won't be aware of how deep you are. It won't be conscious to you. Because see, we're all connected. We're all connected. Everybody is connected. Everybody's experiences is connected to the deep. It's just their consciousness and awareness is not aware of it. Even the youth in gangs and those so-called external negative experiences are involved in some very deep things in terms of life. But the orientation in terms of the meaning of it is not there to really understand the true significance. So then it's misinterpreted, or many times people don't take a lot of time to think about it because they don't want to think about it, or whatever, or they drug up high or whatever. But even then, they're because we're all a part of this circle of life. And so underlying everything we do, the truth is there. The truth is there. But anyway, but yeah, I think you answered your own question though. In terms of as we give, so do we receive. No, I'm just saying the way we like to be, what they say, do unto others as the way you would like to be done. Well, I paraphrase that, but And so as you exemplify certain things, you then give people example of also how to treat you. We deep. Okay. Memphite theology, that's right. We want to go over the Memphite theology. Keep me on point. That's good. Memphite theology. Now, that's Stolen Legacy. Okay.
I just want to know if that comes from something that's previously studied today.
What I'm talking about today? What? You said Memphite theology?
Yeah.
Comes from Stolen Legacy. Do you have a copy of Stolen Legacy? Okay. This is the core book. And Memphite theology, I want to say it's bomb, but yeah, that's right. So, well, I live with them. They live with me. Okay, let's deal with Memphite theology. We can go into usually page 101. That's one of them. Where's the other one? There's a number of examples in here. Talk about the concept of the doctrine of the demiurge in creation. Okay, I'll just read the whole thing. So we'll know. It starts on 101. It says, history tells us that the Persians taught this doctrine more than 6 centuries BC through their leader Zoroaster. History also tells us that Pythagoras in 500 BC taught the same doctrine expressed in terms of monads. The universe consists of 2 unities. The unity from which the series of numbers or beings is derived. Keyword, there's numbers. So there are 2 unities. The unity from which the series of numbers or beings is derived. So 2 things here. One is there's a unity from which numbers are derived, but numbers are also identified as beings. So then numbers are equivalent with beings, and beings are equivalent with numbers. So they're interchangeable. Being absolute unity, which is the source of all, i.e. the monad of monads or the God of gods. Also, listen to the concepts and the terms that are being articulated or talked about. Because when you read other religious doctrine, they start talking about the identity of the Creator, they start using similar terms. So then when you hear those similar terms, you then can understand what is equivalent to. That too, but also what they're talking about. So they're talking about the 2 different unities and one unity, or the absolute unity, which is the source from which numbers are generated, and numbers are equivalent to beings. And that absolute unity, which they call the monad of monads or the God of gods. So then you have so you have 2 unities. One unity is equivalent to the one great absolute unity, and then you have the one. The one, i.e. the first in the series of derived numbers of beings. It is opposed to and limited by plurality, and therefore it is relative unity. A created monad or God or a demiurge. Consequently, the opposition between the one and the many is the source of all the rest. Now this is all being talked about in the context of Memphite theology, which we're going to get into the symbolism of Memphite theology, in terms of the noon, the various so-called unperceivable entities in the noon, and then Ptah coming out of the noon, and simultaneously upon the hill of Ptah rests Atum, and then Atum then calls for creation to proceed, by naming the parts of himself in 4 pairs. So Atun plus the 4 pairs is 9, the Enad. But Ptah added to it makes 10, which is a total completion. But within the noon were 4 pairs of unperceivable entities. So the noon plus the 4 unperceivable entities is also 9. So you have reflection. You have non-manifestation of that which is not material or formed. And then you have this reflection or opposite is that which is formed or material. But at the same time, you have a fundamental construct or construction of how everything operates. Because everything is based upon duality or opposites, which actually create wholes. Right? Like night and day. The combination of night and day creates a whole day. Just daylight is only half a day. You got to bring in the night to get the full 24 hours. So it's the same pattern, which then becomes represented in symbols. In India? That's what they say it came out of that, right. When before that, in terms of the whole thing about 10, it's going to Kemet, right. It just wasn't portrayed in the same way. A lot of things that we get in modern times are ancient ideas that were modified to be able to be grasped by the modern mind. Because basically what the Greeks did is the Greeks took the mythology out of the philosophy and just gave it in terms of straight factual terms so that the Greek mind could comprehend it because it came from a different orientation. I think it definitely has something to do with the lack of melanin in terms of how they process information, as opposed to people of color and melanin and how we process information. Because the lack of melanin will then focus you on the external or the material or the linear way, where a more melanic function is more holistic and symbolical, because whole and symbol is one where the lack of melanin actually creates a physical separation that then is reflected in how you think. Then that becomes diabolical, because then your consciousness is reflecting your separation from the source of light, which is the sun.
Because you don't have the ingredients that occurs at the end.
You can't connect through just your natural processes because your ego has been trained or conditioned to see itself a certain way. But because all things are a reflection of the unity, it is there. It just takes an extra added kind of focus to connect with it. Which, if the people of color were to then bring themselves back into their true harmony, because we are the dominant force on the planet, it would reorientate the planet, which would then reorientate how they function and could also put them back in harmony.
You back to that reflection on the 8 dollars in the moon.
Right.
It was 9 and
I said Ptah, right? Ptah came out. Let's read through it, and then we'll go through it as I read through it. So you'll have it. So it talked about Memphis Theology goes back prior to 4000 BC. And this is just one. There's about 3 major creation stories, right? One coming out of Heliopolis, one coming out of Memphis, and one coming out of Hermiopolis.
So what we're talking about here, when you talk about Memphis theology, you're talking about the creation story.
Right. As defined in Memphis. Now, for us to really, but the essential components are universal. Even in the other stories, the same concept. It just is a different twist to it. So the Egyptian cosmology, how we look at the cosmos, must be represented in 3 parts. So we get numbers. See, we're talking about numbers. So it said that the cosmology is presented in 3 parts. So again, what does 3 represent? 3 represents the Trinity. the harmony. See, again, the thing is as you understand numbers and you start reading this stuff, the function of the number should come out and help you to understand what you're reading. So the Egyptian cosmology must be presented in three parts, each part being supplemental to the other, which means they're not separate. They're supplemental. They're interconnected. And presenting a complete philosophy by their combination. Part 1 deals with the gods of chaos. Part 2 deals with the gods of order and arrangement in creation. And Part 3 deals with the primate of the god through whose logos creation was accomplished. In Part 1, pre-creation or chaos is presented by Ptah, the primate of the gods, emerging from the primeval waters noon in the form of a hill, the Tajanim, i.e. the risen land. To Atum or Adam, A-T-O-M, which you also could probably say A-D-A-M, the sun god immediately joining Ptah, key word, immediately joining Ptah, which means they were simultaneously created. Immediately joining Ptah by emerging also from the chaotic waters of noon and sitting upon him the hill. Key word here, pre-creation or chaos. And we talked about that, right? Remember how we talked about how so-called chaos really represents pre-creation. So instead of looking at a chaotic situation as being destructive, we should see chaotic situation being this condition of pre-creation, because the next move is to order things so creation can proceed. Right. So if we're in very chaotic times, what should that be telling you? We're really at a pioneering stage in the whole new development of a new creation. So we can see things in its positive as opposed to its negative. Of what? Yeah, right. That's right. So a description of the other qualities within the chaos follows. Again, if we learn how to really read what is being said, it said, a description of the other qualities within the chaos follows. So it's saying right here that within chaos, there are qualities within chaos. There are 4 pairs of, there's order within the chaos. It is just not easily perceived. There are 4 pairs of male and female gods in the form of frogs and serpents. Again, these are symbolical meanings, because frogs and serpents are reptiles that go through self-transformation. Frogs go from a tadpole, which is amphibious, to a frog. Snakes shed their skin and reproduce themselves, seemingly self-created. Seemingly. Again, the animals represent qualities that the animal represents in nature. So to understand what the animal represents, you have to understand the role that the animal plays in nature. What is the particular characteristics of these in nature? So you have to really study them. But again, because we're so separated from nature now, we live in concrete, driving cars, live in houses. We're not around in there. We're on the farm no more, raising animals and going out in the woods and seeing life around us. That's why we're becoming very ignorant. Their names are, these 4 pairs of qualities in the chaos are Noon and Nanet, which is the primeval ocean and the primeval matter. You have Hu and Ha-Het, the illimitable and the boundless. You have Kuk and Kaket, darkness and obscurity. And you have Amun and Amunet, the hidden and the concealed ones. So within the seemingly chaotic, you have primeval, or the original ocean. And the ocean they're talking about is the ocean of energy, not water. and the primeval matter. We're talking about the substance. You know, if you get into subatomic physics, right? E equals mc squared. And then in terms of energy, can transform into matter, and matter can transform into energy. So they were already talking about this stuff over 6,000, 7,000 years ago, probably 20, 50,000. So it's talking about the illimitable and the boundless. So there's no boundaries, and it's illimitable. You're talking about darkness and obscurity.
You say
Boundless and illimitable. You're talking about darkness and obscurity, and you're talking about the hidden and the concealed ones, which means they are there, you're just hidden. Now you need to keep this in your mind and your consciousness, because as we start talking about the collective unconscious and archetypes, you will see the same correspondences in the collective unconscious, which is that primordial ocean within our psyche that is illimitable, boundless, it is hidden and concealed to the conscious mind, and exposes itself through symbols.
But none of this existed until it was named.
Right. And it doesn't exist until it is named.
Until it's named.
Because until you can identify it, it don't exist.
Okay.
Right. That's right. Or by naming a thing, you can qualify its existence. Right. Because its name then puts a certain definition on that thing. And a name relates to identity. Identity relates to idea or I.
So the name has no meaning.
All names have meaning. Yeah.
I mean, well, I guess what I'm talking about is making up names.
But it still have a meaning. Because it is a well, I won't say a function, but it is a grouping of syllables that make sound. And every sound is a frequency that has a quality.
It's the song, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you make the name.
Right. So it does have meaning. It's just that, so when people make things up, they make things up for a reason. You know, they felt something, they got something, it came from somewhere, it's not nothing.
So naming it, that means beginning to understand it.
Right, being able to perceive it. Then the second part is the gods of order and arrangement are represented as follows. The first pair of pre-creation gods are together present. So then you have a first pair of pre-creation gods. So everything is happening in pairs.
But these look like male and female.
Right, that's what they said. There are 4 pairs of male and female gods. Right. The first pair of pre-creation gods are together present. Ptah, the primeval heel, who is the thought and word of all the gods. Together with Atum, who rests upon Ptah.
And then when he says together with, it says Ptah and Atum, they appear simultaneously. So when he says together with, that means again.
Ptah and Atum. It says the first pair of pre-creation gods are together present. Atum, or Adam, A-T-O-M, or A-T, or A-D-A-M, having absorbed the thought and creative power of Ptah, then proceeds with the work of creation. He named 4 pairs of parts of his own body, which become gods. And in this way, 8 gods are created, who together with himself become 9 gods in one family or godhead called the Enad. This is when we come to the point. Magic is the key to the interpretation of ancient religions and philosophy. Part 3 tells of the specific powers of Ptah, which Atum absorbs, but does not tell us how Atum absorbs them. In one sense, yes. In another sense, it can be a father. Because in actuality, the original gods were both. It depends on what role they were playing, what direction you're looking at. Because if you come from out of the noon to Ptah, it's like a mother. But from Ptah to Atum, could be a father. In terms of the masculine being the generating, and then the female being that creates and makes the material that makes it become manifest. But originally, in our origins, they're both male and female. So they're a unity.
So those are the dualities within the middle ground.
Duality is the function of any kind of movement, any kind of activity, be it on this side or the other side. It has to be a dual. It's a duality there. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any movement. Part 1 tells us how, for it describes the movement of Atum as emerging from the primeval waters and sitting upon Ptah, the risen hill or land. It, however, does not give us a reason for Atum's movement. It says a behavior can only be understood only when it applies to interpretation, the key of magical principles. And what is the magical principle involved in Atum's behavior? It is this: the qualities of and attributes, or qualities or attributes of entities, human or divine, are distributed throughout their various parts, and contact with such entities releases those qualities. It is now clear that by making contact with Ptah, Atum immediately received the attributes of Ptah's creative thought and speech and omnipotence, and became the instrument and the logos and the demiurge through whom the task of creation was undertaken and completed. Key word, you have logos and demiurge. When we started off, I said there were two unities. You had absolute unity, and then you had the one, the first in the series of derived numbers or beings. It is opposed to and limited by plurality, and therefore it is relative unity, a created monad or God, a demiurge. Consequently, the opposition between the one and the many is the source of all the rest. And you can look at that in double ways. How can you look at it double?
I will ask a question.
Okay, we'll get back to
This
that.
concept of social contract theory, does that fit into the ancient way?
How do you define that?
They claim that men got together because they wanted peace and order in the thing, because they developed a social contract theory or order, in a society.
I believe in a social contract because originally, if you go back to the oldest living people on the planet, which is the Twa, so-called pygmies, there's social order there. I mean, humans are social beings. Humans are not developed out of context of a group. That's an abnormality for a human to operate out of the context of other human beings. Because the natural order of things of humans is to operate in cooperation with a family, an extended family, a clan, a community. So that's the original social contract.
Well, you mentioned human behavior.
But now back to the point. The point that I was raising here was when we talked about this opposition. It said the opposition between the one and the many is the source of all the rest. Now, we talked about an absolute unity and a relative unity. So in the context of Memphite theology, what is the absolute unity? The source of all. In the relative unity, which is the demiurge, or the created, would be what? I already said it. Right, and what would that be relative to Memphite theology? Atum, or Adam, having absorbed the thought and creative power of Ptah, then proceeds the work of creation. He names 4 pairs of parts of his own body which become God, and in this way 8 gods are created, together with himself become 9, in one family or Godhead called the Enad. So who is, or what is the demiurge, or the relative one? No. It's Atum. Atum, the Adam, having absorbed the thought and creative power of Ptah, then proceeds with the work of creation. He names 4 pairs of parts of his own body, which become gods, and in this way 8 gods are created, who together with himself become 9 gods in one family, or Godhead, called Enad. Ptah is not a manifested entity. Ptah really is like the culmination of the summation of the noon and the 8 unperceivable entities in the noon. Ptah is that. So it's almost like you have a reflection of each other. Ptah is reflected back into the noon, which is illimitable, boundless, obscure, concealed. Where Atum is the other reflection moving toward creation. So if you put them back to back, they're both sides. We're going in different directions. Which also represents a polarity, where the noon itself is really the context of the absolute that's beyond all things. It's the zero. Or that which has infinite circumference, which means it is illimitable. Everything operates within the context or within the circumference of the noon, which is the infinite potentiality.
But Ptah is not a being, but a true being.
Both of them. Ptah is a being. Ptah absorbs the heart, he's the tongue, and the creative utterance or creative power of the qualities in the noon.
Okay, then Atum took those
Right.
from him.
And became the demiurge.
Okay, and created.
He's the relative one, or it's the relative one. Right.
So what he created is objective.
In one sense, but even the gods themselves are not yet manifest. When you create the gods, the manifested world became a function of the interaction of the gods. Because the gods were immortal. So they represented functions of the universe, of the observable universe, that are not human.
So they're still subjective then.
Because then the gods then start to create heroes, and then the heroes then start to create, or you have the creation of humans. So, of course, right. Remember, gods, beings, functions, cosmic principles. It's all the same. We're not talking about. What do you think I'm talking about?
No, I know what you're talking about, but I know.
People may think I'm talking about gods being some kind of personalities or something, walk around somewhere doing something, talking in something.
Right, okay.
Right. No, it's just a form of speech.
Okay, that makes the distinction then, because that means none of them, they're all are subjective. And the only thing that is
When you say subjective, what do you mean by subjective?
I mean, they're not manifest. That's what I mean.
Right, in their pure form.
But those, when they create, what they create becomes
Manifest.
objective.
Right.
That
Attributes. Because basically what you're talking about is pure energy is stepping down
Right.
and becoming more and more material.
Okay.
And so as we start talking about number, it's talking about the genesis of creation and how then from those 1 you get duality, 2, from the 2 you get the 3, and then from the 3 you have generated all the multiplicity of things. Because you get the interaction between different pairs, because the idea was different gods started mating with different ones, and then they created different sub-gods that then started to create other things. That's really just talking about how the different elements start to interact with each other and manifest all these various things in creation.
Well, you see the Fibonacci relationship thing. 1 plus 2 is 3.
Right.
And then it moves
Eureka.
on.
He's hooking it up. Y'all, you understand what he said? What did he say? Right, but what are we saying? Relative to the statement about the God and creation. How is he hooking it up? I just say, no, we don't understand, let's go back over it. See, that's the issue. If people don't say they don't understand, then we move on. We move to more material. When in reality, the people didn't understand the first material. So we didn't went on to 3 or 4 materials, and people nod their head like they understand, but then they don't. But it ain't about, yeah, right. But the thing is, it's like we're going to build a building, right, and it's like 25 stories high, and we do story 1, and we don't complete it, and we try to go to story 2, hoping that some kind of way story 1 will get completed. By the time we try to get up to number 7, this thing gonna fall down. And then we're gonna talk about the stuff ain't right. It ain't the stuff, it's how we are applying it. But anyway, we're gonna need to get some tests, have pop quizzes. Hey. You should, that'll let you know where we at, and then let us know what we need to do. You ain't gonna know. You're not gonna know. That's what they call a pop quiz. It's
You said that God created the hero, and you were coming down to
human. Well, basically, the heroes, if you actually look into the original hero is the sun. The sun myth. And the journey of the sun's interaction in its course through the day and in the moon and the night. So the original, and then the various activities, thus the behaviors of the celestial bodies became, they made into stories of the original heroes and heroines. Then what happened is humans started to then try to emulate those qualities to be the highest that they could be. Then they became the hero representatives or the human representatives of those qualities on the earth. And then they became the ones that the legends and things started to be talked about that then became the inspirations of the people. Right. Where the original qualities really represent. And started equating it to being human, or live human. So even the Christ myth, the Christ is a myth of a cosmic reality that the initiates then live that lifestyle and become God-like because they reflect those same qualities in their life. Each of us could become Haru, Christ, Krishna, Buddha if we were willing to sacrifice to live the life.
I have a question on some minutes. I meant to ask you this was on astrology. I heard a different story, and that's that the fact that the way that the sun is set there was forerunner to the fact that there was actually going to be a son of God. So the cosmic reality is reflecting something that would come to be. So like maybe the Old Testament or something before that, they knew that this was coming.
They knew what was coming.
That there was going to be a person. Like,
A person?
Yeah, a person.
So you're identifying that there was only one Savior?
You have to know what you read in the Bible.
The way some people read it from the Bible, and the way some people have been taught. So first of all, have you ever read the book 16 Crucified Saviors?
No.
You can get that book, or go to in the bookstore or the library and browse through it. But it already defines, it was like 40-something of them that he documented in terms of Savior. Plus, did you get into the handouts on the, we did on the meaning of initiation early on? And we talked about the mythical and the mystic Christ. And then when you say they, who are they that said this?
Well, I saw this on a Christian podcast, and we got a document of the soul and miracle of God. And actually, God was showing people from even way back before the person who was ever born, that this was actually going to come to pass. So like a gospel is written in the sky.
That's true. The gospel is written in the sky. But the Christ was initiate. He was an initiate who had went through initiation and had came out to... Right. And there were many initiates and many saviors.
But the Jews are still waiting for the Messiah.
And the thing is that the Christ myth is just the myth of the Piscean age. If you go back to the Aryan age, you have the ram as the savior. If you go back to the Taurian age, you have the bull as the image. Christ is the fish. Yes, it was pre-written in the cosmos that the savior of an age is going to reflect the stars, because they take on the characteristics of the heavenly order. If you follow what I'm saying? So what he's saying is true, but he's separating it. Like the Christian thing is the only age or era where there was an identified savior. And then he's trying to equate the whole thing to a personality, when there were many saviors. So then what is a savior? Or a Messiah? This is one that is a light bearer who brings light. And then what's the light? Light is truth. It's the knowledge. So the true knowledge is going to be a reflection of the time-space pattern. Because the time-space pattern defines the logos, or the word. Because the word is a pattern of energy. So the time and the space defines the new logos, or the new word that needs to be made flesh. So a new era, they sent out a messenger to exemplify the characteristics and the qualities of that new time. It's defined, well, the age of Aquarius is the age of groups. It's the age of networks. It's the age where it will be group consciousness. It's going to be about groups coming together to try to exemplify knowledge.
And then over time, gradually, over this 26,000 years that we can be reaching in the Aquarian age.
No, Aquarian age is only 1/12 of the 26,000 years. 2100, 22,160 years, give or take some
So over
years.
that time, attitudes will change. Like
Yes.
now people will have like a fish on their cars.
Right,
They will change and there will be a new symbol.
that's right.
And nobody will really, it will be so gradual a change, nobody will really know that it was.
No, people know now. I mean, the stuff that's out there is just that early on, the old forces are still dominant. They're still dominant because they're trying to hold on to the past. They're still dominant. Again, that's why I understand the cycles. Like sunrise, it's going to be a beautiful day, but it's still kind of misty and chilly outside. And then as the sun starts to rise, it heats up and gets hotter and hotter, and then it's going to culminate. And then it's going to start to decline. When its time is getting over, it's time for another age to come. So then if you take the 26,000 or 2,100 years and break it up into its phases, you can see how the shift and stuff is going to change. Christianity as we know it, because age of Aquarius is the age of the revealing. It's the age of mass initiation. During the olden times, only individuals were initiated. The age of Aquarius is the age of revelation. It's the age where the esoteric knowledge will be revealed to the masses. It's the first time in history where the mass consciousness will be able to understand the truth. Where in the past, it was only given out in fable, symbolism, myth. Look at the internet. Look at the international communication network that's happening. It's creating the material basis for globalization of consciousness.
see how everybody gets all this new age stuff too.
Yes. Of course they don't.
You're right.
Age of Aquarius, that's right. You're absolutely right. It's not going. Yeah, Aquarius is also ruled radical transformation of society, rebellion, revolution, chaos, anarchy are also qualities of Aquarius. Now, there's always positive and negative. So, what's going to determine what are going to be the dominant qualities is going to be related to the level of consciousness of the leadership and people in position of influence. And people with the knowledge becoming influential to reach the mass consciousness of other people. But in the interim, in any change over from one age to another, there's major chaos. There has to be. Because only through chaos can you create conditions for a new creation. Yes. Yes, it is.
Every gradient time for the story.
Right.
So the thing is that when America is because you wonder, because you study history, you know that's going to happen, and you wonder when. And I never knew that this was like
now.
time.
Right. We're in that transition now. So it's happening now. Now but the issue is do you have to go through a forced cataclysmic transformation, or can you consciously regenerate yourself? If we have the conscious and the self-discipline, we could channel this energy and consciously recreate ourselves in the form of a new time.
Without the revolution.
Well, there would be a revolution, just means change. But without the level of bloodshed, yeah, it wouldn't be as physically destructive with all the external chaos and death and anarchy and all this kind of stuff. We're calling that into being by a lack of cooperation with the time.
With the natural change.
Right. So we become out of sync. And so by us becoming out of sync, we get in disharmony, so it creates disease and destruction that reflects itself in our behavior and how we're thinking, because we're thinking just externally. We're not really understanding the greater thing.
So the new consciousness will not be all at once.
It's going to probably take 2,000 years. I mean, look at the level of entrenchment, and you got people, the Chinese is building up a thing. They're not going to just change. They're building this whole industrial empire and stuff. Yeah, after about 2,000 years of radical transformation, all kind of changes, all kind of created at the same time. Age of Aquarius is also deals with invention, innovation, creation, science, space travel. There probably will be visitations from other places that become consciously known. All that's all that. All that's all that. But that doesn't change what people still got to do to live right. You know what I'm saying? All those things are signatures or that's what this other paper, this handout, which we won't get into the next week, read the material, talks about synchronicity and the relationship between the psychic mind and the physical universe. Our psyche is on the same continuum as the universe is. So that means that we're connected. So as the universe is going through changes, those changes are registered in our psyche that then becomes reflected in our conscious mind in various symbolical forms. But because we haven't been trained to interpret symbolical occurrences accurately, we may ignore them. We might just think as, oh, that's just something funny or it's not even significant, when it is significant. So in terms of daydreams, fantasy, let me go there. And so, we talked about Memphis theology, review it some more because we're going to reflect back on it. But I want to give you a little bit. You really need to read this because it gives you a very concrete connection between number and nature and consciousness. It says, in recent years, the question of the relation of psyche and matter has come more and more to the forefront of scientific discussion. Although we still have to admit that we're dealing with an unfathomable mystery. So we talk about unfathomable mystery. What that brings to mind? The noon. So yeah, we're dealing with the noon. You know, the illimitable, the boundless, the concealed. But a few reflections on certain facts may be ventured in order to clear at least a small stretch of the way into this impenetrable realm of nature. Along with the discoveries of modern physics, the most important discovery made at the beginning of this century was undoubtedly that of the unconscious. Empirical proof was adduced that our personality consists not only of an ego-centered field of consciousness, but also of an immeasurable, wide realm of unconscious psychic activity. What does that remind you of? The noon. So you talk about the noon is in you. The noon in Memphis Theology. We talk about the noon, and in the noon, we got to just reading that. And so the noon represented the great void, the great all out of which everything came from. In the Memphite, right. The four pre-creation qualities that resided in the noon. Noon like N-U-N. Could be none. Yeah, N-U-N is like none. Yeah, so it could be none. Right. It says, listen, now this is very important. It says, through dreams, visions, spontaneous fantasies, faulty actions, involuntary gestures, physical symptoms, and other factors, we are able to obtain a certain degree of indirect information about this realm of the psyche. This is critical in terms of how do we relate, or how do you relate, how do we relate to dreams, visions, spontaneous fantasies, faulty actions, involuntary gestures, physical symptoms. You're talking about physical symptoms are a reflection of responses to cosmic change. You just don't remember your dream.
So we're reacting.
That might be because when you wake up, you're so busy trying to get into your day, it just goes back to your unconscious mind. Just start thinking about it. Start thinking about trying to remember before you go to bed. You put that thought in your mind and start helping you to remember when you wake up. You can start self-programming yourself to focus in on certain things. But anyway, let's keep on going here. Let's. I cannot get through all of this because we only have about 10 minutes left. Let's see. Where's my outline? Where's my outline? Yeah, it is. Just about. I'm gonna try to get through. It says, turn to the next page, page 4. Let me read all that. Let's do it. Young discovered that while a sector of this unconscious region is indeed personal and consists of personal complexes, which is your personal unconscious, a further portion is universally human and appears to have the same structure in every individual. So you're talking about a portion of your psyche, which is your collective unconscious, is universally true. Young called this layer of the unconscious, which manifests itself similarly in all mankind, the collective unconscious. This layer does not represent merely a psychic appendage of archaic remains, as Sigmund Freud saw it, but the living, creative matrix of all our unconscious and conscious functioning. The collective unconscious is the living, creative matrix of all our unconscious and conscious functioning, the essential structure of all our psychic life. So in actuality, our whole psychic life rests on the none, or the noon, or the collective unconscious. And the noon is illimitable, which means it contains the past, present, and the future, which means down within your unconscious mind, you connect to the past, the present, and the future. If we go back to the principle of magic. See, you should have projected it. The thought and the creative utterance. You understand then what power resides within your own self. because the attributes and qualities, both human and divine, reside within their parts. And contact with such entities releases those qualities. So then when you go down and contact the unconscious, you then contact the noon or the all. Right. That speaks to you through symbols, dreams, visions, fantasies, etc. Your unconscious mind, or the unconscious part of you, that is part of the universal. The way it reflects into your mind is through dreams, all things I read, dreams, fantasies, visions. What we take as being inconsequential are actually messages or information from the universal. That's right, it does it gets distorted based upon the clarity of your consciousness. If your consciousness is distorted, it's been miseducated, then you will misinterpret what it's saying to you. That's why we had to have initiation, so that we could uncondition ourselves and recreate ourselves based upon universal truth, so that we understood the true meaning of what was coming to us and not the misinterpreted things that have been put in us. That's why until we reinstitute an initiatory process that reconditions the conscious mind based upon universal truth, we will consistently have destructive, inharmonious social conditions. Because the original leaders of society were initiates. The presidents, the Congress, and all the mayors, they would have been initiates in running the government. Right, they would have operated according to mind. Yes. You can have multiple, a symbol has multiple meanings relative to the context that it's operating in. The essence of it will be the same, but what it's talking about, the specifics, can be various because the specific conditions are different. But the essential meaning will be the same. So what am I saying? I'm saying like resurrection. Resurrection can have many external faces, but underneath it is talking about one needing to go through a transformation and resurrect themselves. So it could be, somebody saw himself on a cross, or somebody saw himself buried, or saw themselves going through some transforming situation where they might have been devoured and spit out, or that they buried, all kinds of forms, or had a thing with a snake, because